So what is the function of distress and suffering in the world? In an imperfect world, suffering is necessary and even salutary. It is a tormenting power that points to disturbances of the order. Without this haunting warning, we humans would not even notice where we are lagging behind the course of evolution and where improvements are urgently needed. Do not think that suffering is ordained for those on earth. Perfection is ordained. It is disharmony on earth that causes pain. There is a need for suffering everywhere where there are misconduct, violations of the cosmic law, of the higher will. Humanity has suffered most through its severance from the higher will. Under normal conditions, humanity does not need pain. Such an unnatural state is caused by an improper life. Mostly, if not sheer malice is involved, it is ignorance which leads to wrong behavior. Because they do not know the higher order, most people do not even realize that they are violating cosmic law. Therefore, we cannot say clearly enough, the source of all suffering is ignorance. Ends the ignorance, ends the suffering. All human sorrow is the result of ignorance. Knowledge, let us reiterate, will put an end to the suffering of mankind. Only when we have acquired the necessary knowledge, the individual and humanity as a whole will be able to avoid the mistakes which cause the suffering. It is not suffering that is needed, but liberation. Without stupidity, Earth would be a paradise. So, what is my most important contribution to fighting the suffering of the world? Obtain higher knowledge. Overcome your own suffering first. Then spread this knowledge and thereby help your fellow human beings to defeat their misery. Nothing should deter one from sharing his knowledge and encouraging the growth of consciousness. Therein lies love for one's fellow man. We see again, spiritual help is the most important and the most effective. Help in spirit is the most powerful. True giving is of the spirit. Let every heart pour pour forth streams of spiritual gifts. Not without cause it is said that every beat of the heart is a smile, a tear, and gold. Any businessman may help to combat physical pain by material means, but only those who know can relieve spiritual suffering. Knowledge is above everything. Each one who contributes a particle of knowledge is a benefactor of mankind. Few are those who are qualified to help the people to gain knowledge. Only spread joy around you, then you can never be wrong. You were not mistaken in expounding joy. In addition to pointing to misbehavior, suffering has yet another function. It gives us an impetus to progress according to the plan of evolution, to overcome obsolete attitude, habits, and ways of life. One of the key messages of Agni Yoga is people suffer in order to ascend. Similarly, the Bible says, "For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, that we might be partakers of his holiness." Suffering purifies. It urges us to discard those bad qualities that have caused the pain and to acquire better ones. Spiritually overcome suffering ennobles us, as evidenced by the beautiful face of Michelangelo's Pietà in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Each growth of spirit requires burdening through circumstances. There exists an ancient legend that out of human sufferings are created gemstones. So again, I have to change my attitude. Yes. Consider suffering as an impulse that pushes you to take the next step on the ladder of spiritual ascent. Then it will get the best out of you. Like as every grain of sand, leaf of tree, sense or organ of body has developed by stress and strain and all that action of life which impels to stress and strain and consequent suffering. So it is that all the best in man can only grow by suffering. Analyze your life. What do you discover? From what resulted the key findings and the progress that you have made? I have actually learned from suffering. You are becoming convinced that people are open to cognition. Such a step of evolution is not accidental. Many shocks and much trepidation have compelled hearts to shudder and begin to resound. Verily heavy must be the burden in order to enter the beautiful garden. Those who declare that it is possible to attain spiritual growth without suffering speak a great untruth. When at the close of his long, hard struggle, a disciple has reached a certain degree of the great white lodge and can look back on the path he has trodden, he may be able to see that, figuratively speaking, the icy blasts on his bare skin, the burning heat of the sun, the heavy blows on the unprotected flesh, the steps of enemies and all the other calamities which threatened to overwhelm him were so many necessary tests of his power of endurance, his vital energy, and ability to maintain a state of equilibrium in the face of every disturbing condition, and were all essential to the unfoldment of his spiritual nature. Unfortunately, it is thus with people. Without suffering, most of them would not move forward at all. The noblest way to gain insight is through thought and reflection, the simplest by imitation, and the bitterest by experience. He who does not voluntarily learn to refrain from violations of the divine order, he who does not strive to discard the qualities that stand in the way of further evolution, and to acquire those necessary for mastering the future, he must be forced to do so by sheer suffering. Not shame so much as suffering will compel quests for salvation. Above all, malice and selfishness cause much suffering. Those people cannot or do not want to learn in any other way. Actually, they deserve our pity because there is still much suffering for them in store. Those who have turned away from the Spirit must endure unhappiness, because why else would they return to the Spirit? Therein lies the meaning of great events. So long as selfishness exists, pain must live to do its perfect work. Banish selfishness, and the cause and sequence of pain must follow. For selfishness lives and thrives on gratified desire. Therefore, folk wisdom says, he that will not hear must feel. You act smarter. You avoid suffering by purifying yourself voluntarily and continuing to perfect yourself. Not through fear of any punishment, but in anticipation of their own destiny should people turn to purification. The measure that each one sets for himself is not severity, but justice. How lamentable it is that most people can refine their feelings only through suffering. The time will come when people will be amazed that they have refined themselves through suffering, having missed many opportunities for elevating their consciousness. Could it be that man evolved from stone, since we see that a sharp blow is needed to ignite a spark in him? If we want to follow the Mahatmas, we must go through the suffering of this world like them. Only by making this experience on our own body and by rising above it, can we help those who are still dwelling in grief and misery. How, then, can the heart realize all the beauty of existence if it has not penetrated into all the joys and sorrows of life? Thus, it is that often reading the book of lives, the heart trembles, but then the tear of suffering is transmuted into a pearl. The more fiery the heart, the greater the joys and the sufferings. Let us patiently participate in the suffering of Christ, so that we may deserve to share in the glory of his kingdom. Why me? This is how people complain who cannot understand why they have to suffer. However, thereby they are accusing God himself and doubting the meaningfulness of the cosmic order. Many even lose their faith out of sheer desperation over all the suffering that they have either to watch or to endure themselves. When a man cries out, "Why?" he is thinking neither of the past nor the future. He isolates himself from the higher forces, as if accusing them. That must not be. You must never lose the childlike confidence in the beauty and justice of creation. That is why it is so tremendously important that you understand the meaning behind your or your fellow man's suffering. We had already talked about the law of correspondence. It says, you attract exactly that experience which is necessary for your further development. For that too, you should actually be grateful. Desolate, weary burden bearers, embryonic saviors of men and worlds, strive to realize. But for the hunger and thirst, the weariness and pain, you could never know the fullness of eternal love, could never taste the water from the fountains of eternal truth, or know the blessed joy and peace which follow upon righteous toil and patient endurance of pain. That means suffering is a help, suffering is a guidepost. When you follow it, you will find the shortest path to the necessary improvements in living conditions. The misfortune in which you are just now being caught is nothing else but the next step on the ladder of ascent. When you have climbed it and overcome the suffering, you will be standing on a higher, greater and stronger position than before. The suffering of the spirit is the one ladder on the shortest path. Each suffering is already an advancement